Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's webinar from Cisco Collaboration. My name is Jesse King, and I'm a Cisco Systems sales specialist all around cloud calling. I specifically focus on Webex calling, and today our topic of discussion is going to be how to secure communications inside of your environment with Cisco collaboration tools. This is a really important topic for today's work from home initiative with everything going on in the world around COVID. You're going to hear from a lot of the experts today that I brought on, and some important things that we're going to discuss is around security, reliability, and high availability for our Cisco Cloud solutions. Today we have with us Jim Lundy, founder and CEO of Aragon Research. We're going to hear a lot of great information and dialogue from Jim today. From the Cisco product team, we have Mark Kushner. He's actually the director of Cisco Cloud Calling for security. And that's going to be an exciting person to have on here to talk all about the resiliency and what we're doing around security for cloud calling. Brian Freed is also with us. He's the senior manager of Webex Calling for our product management. And then, of course, myself, Jesse King. I'm the sales leader for cloud calling. So with that, let me introduce our first topic today. And, what's changed today in the industry, Jim, is why do we have this need for secure cloud communications? I mean, this is nothing new. I think communications have always wanted to be secure, but there's obviously a hyper focus with the work from home initiative today. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Jesse, sure. It's great to be here with you and the Cisco team. There's a lot of things going on today in the workplace, whether it's at work, which we're not at, or at home, or at a factory, or wherever it is that you work. And one of the things I would just like to talk about on this next slide is that there's a lot of focus today on automation, on things like intelligence. We think the fourth industrial revolution has gone from computing to the idea of automating processes and adding machine intelligence to those processes. But the dark story, or the one that people don't want to talk about, I kind of call it the elephant in the room, that people say it's shush, don't talk about it, is security. And so that's why it's good that we're talking about this, because we need to talk about it more. And in many cases, it's not being discussed, it's being overlooked. And part of the problem is the issue of really who owns security. And that's also become a debate. Well, that's an IT issue, it's not my issue. But anybody that is buying software today, if you're a business leader, you're responsible for security. It's not just, you can't slap it on the CISO and say, it's all on the CISO that reports to the CIO. It's actually, if we go to the next, I would make an argument that it really starts at the top. And it's been, kind of some humorous TV commercials the last couple of years after some of the ransomware attacks. But now people won't even admit they've been attacked. And so when you actually look at who owns security, it's everyone's responsibility. But I'm going to point to the CEO. Say it's really a CEO level responsibility, which means that the CEO needs to flow it down throughout his direct reports. Everyone has a role. And I think when we talk today about communication security and collaboration, it's been one of the underreported areas that's actually led to some terrific and horrific breaches over the last 20 years that really today enterprises are only becoming aware of. So I think, like I said, it's very timely. If you're the CIO, clearly, the CEO is going to be looking to you. If the CISO reports to you, or maybe to the Chief Digital Officer, the Chief Information Security Officer is going to be there. The real estate team has responsibility for security, but every manager in your enterprise has a responsibility for security. And I think that many people may not have said that before. But that's actually the reality, is that everyone has a responsibility for this, which means even including did you do some due diligence on that product you just selected? Well, you paid for it with your credit card, you're expensing it. Did you actually, do any due diligence on that, or did you just do it?
Yeah.
and ask forgiveness later. And so that's really one of the things that's starting to come out. We've seen a lot of things in the news lately. Even today, I saw a piece that the agent for some celebrities was held hostage because they say they've got some bad information, some bad pictures of some of the celebrities, and they're basically asking for millions of dollars. And it's a ransomware attack. So, like I said, there's a lot of things that are kind of going on. But if you step back and say, where are you, meaning you in an enterprise, you work for a company, what is your company's position on security? Do you talk about security? Are you aware of security? How are you securing your things? And as we go through this webinar, I think it's going to be a great dialogue with the Cisco team about all the things that they're doing and some ideas we're going to share about what you need to do about it. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things I want to basically say is that it's becoming a top corporate issue, meaning security. Now, we've got two charts here. One is our top technology trends to look for in 2020, just overall technology. And we had security, i.e. cloud security, coming at number 5. But we also have digital identity at number 10. And today, there's really no true digital identity solution out there. Everybody's got patchworks, but that's actually one of the issues is who owns your identity and is there a way to prove your identity? And the reality is we're still using driver's licenses and passports as our identity because, things like, Active Directory really are what IT uses to prove who you are with verification through your email. And that's why people get hacked. If we actually shift to the right of the slide and say, well, what are all the security issues? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And, it gets kind of messy. But the thing I want to point out is on our stack rank of top security issues, communication security was number 10. It's not at the top because I would just tell you that people are not talking about communication security. I mean, IT people are, and security people are, and people that get hacked are, but everybody else doesn't want to talk about it. And that's why we're doing this webinar is to really kind of drill into, well, what is it? And why is it important? And like I said, there's, sometimes there's reasons why these things happen. And sometimes it has to do with, we'll talk later in the webinar about, product level issues from vendors that don't care about security because they're just being pushed by their investors just to ship a product. So we think, like I said, if you are doing communications today, is someone listening to your call? And are you even aware of it? Or are you doing texting? Is somebody watching what you text? Are you texting secure information, like, for example, about your product plans? Are you talking about it? In some of the companies I've worked at where espionage was a big deal, you were trained, like, look, when you go out to lunch, do not talk about this stuff. And today, that's going to become a little bit lax, even talking about stuff. Like, are there people in your restaurant listening to you from your competitor? Oh, that could never happen. And yet I know many examples where that has happened. But it's worse today in that there's, companies, there's nation states that want to listen to what you're saying. So that's why we think that communication security is as important as cloud security. And hopefully as a result of this webinar, we're going to help you kind of see that. So I want to talk a little bit about approaches to security on the next slide.
And just to jump in here too, it's and not to make fun of security, but it's almost like a Tom Cruise movie where you're having some sort of espionage by eavesdropping what you laid out. And I just want to call out two things that I think I heard you say here is, lines of business that are buying calling or communications, they're probably not thinking about security. But what I heard you say was IT and an overall, when they're thinking about an architecture or how they're buying and putting collaboration tools together, that's CISO and working with their communications director within an organization's thinking about how to purchase and blend a secure embedded product from an organization.
Yeah, I think, I would say this, I think that there used to be actually more stringency around that. And I think because of SaaS and because of the power of business buyers, they sometimes break their own rules.
Yes.
And, and I think one of the things, it might be good to illustrate how serious this problem is. Everybody's heard about ransomware, but what you haven't heard of is companies that actually went out of business because they were spied on. And a number of years ago, this is going back more than 10 years ago, there was a company in Canada, and every time the CEO got on a call, and this company actually provided communications, there was malware in their network that spun up and listened to the CEO, recorded the call, shipped the call off to wherever it was going, and then the malware disassembled and went back into the ether. No one knows who actually did that. We have ideas that it might be from somewhere in Asia, but that particular company, which was called Nortel, eventually went out of business. And part of it was because all their IP was stolen, because they were recording the CEO, and no one at the company, including their top IT guys, never knew it happened until years later. So that's why we say this is actually much more serious than you think. And that's why it's, kind of a buyer beware kind of thing. But, Jesse, I wanted to shift to this whole idea relative to what you bring up, which is when you're doing due diligence and you're looking at providers, there's really kind of a cultural approach to security that sometimes doesn't come out in a set of product specs. And so I'm talking about the slide that's called Two Approaches to Security. And one, which I would probably say the Cisco team is embraced because you guys provide networking and security software where security is kind of a way of life. And that's what a lot of large enterprises are looking for. Actually, everyone should be looking for it, but like a lot of people just are not educated about the risk of not having good security. And so when security is a way of life, it has to be engineered into the product. And again, there's a lot of reasons for that. Like, for example, how long does it take to fix a bug? Another modality, though, is really security as an afterthought. And that has to do with kind of the modern development approach of a minimum viable product, or MVP. And that's what all startup CEOs are taught here in Silicon Valley, which is get your MVP done and ship it. In fact, sometimes they're even told by the VCs, just ship it even if it doesn't work. But usually you don't hear this thing like, hey, maybe you shouldn't ship it because you actually didn't do all the security stuff you need to do. That never comes up. It comes up that like, we'll talk about that after. Get that product out the door. And so that really puts the onus on the buyer to say, wait a minute, is everybody actually taking security seriously? And the true answer is no, they are not, because there's pressure to make revenue, to get, customer install numbers. And security sometimes is not a measurement they're looking at. And so again, it becomes what we call buyer beware, where they just, maybe they care, but they care after there's a breach. Oh, I'm so sorry that happened, Mr. Customer. And so you actually see that happening in the market today. There are people that basically, I'm sorry. And, we had issues early in the mobility market, still issues in the mobility market. There's issues in the communications market every single day. And like I said, there's two approaches to it. And it's not hard to tell what approach a provider has if you just look at what's gone on over even the last 24 months. So a lot of times people don't look at it that way, but it really, I would say, it's kind of a culture of believing in security as part of the way you run your company. So the buyers need to understand that and buy products that are secure, and the providers have a responsibility to sell secure products. And again, that we don't have a meeting of the minds there. There is tension in the market. And that's why in many cases, sometimes a startup never gets into a large enterprise because you won't meet our security requirements. And then they basically, we're SOC 2 and all that. But a lot of times they sometimes don't tell the truth. So that would be, some of my thoughts about that. And, Jesse, I'm going to turn it back over to you for some more comments.
Jim, thanks for that outlook. I really appreciate it. And those are two interesting approaches. And security is a way of life. Here at Cisco, it's been embedded within our Cisco personnel, how we develop and our whole security lifecycle. And we're going to get into some of those details later on in this webinar. But what I find is, if it's security as a way of life, it truly is around how fast can you be proactive for bug fixes. Let's focus on customer behavior. We can't expect our end users to be aware of security. I think we've seen that in the industry, that between phishing attacks to all sorts of flaws that are available, we really need to embed it inside the product itself. So let's talk about really what constitutes true end-to-end security. And I really want all three of you to have a crack at talking about this. So, Mark, let's start with you. Um, tell us about end-to-end security with Webex calling. What actually are we getting at around this?
Great question, Jesse. I think certainly it starts with your kind of security nuts and bolts, following security frameworks, deploying controls like encryption and access control. But I really think from my perspective, I see the bigger part of that for me being just the amazing range of Cisco products and services I get to leverage as a security leader. If you look at it, starting with like HyperFlex converged infrastructure, which kind of provides the secure foundation for our environment. Our Cisco MPP phones, which basically, provide that, secure access for media and call control. And then you top it off with pretty much all the security services and products I have at my disposal. Things like Duo multi-factor authentication, AMP for malware detection, Umbrella for DNS visibility and protection, and even things like Stealth Watch, which kind of gives me visibility into my traffic flows, where I can analyze for bad things happening, and all the way to the back end where Talos is providing me threat intelligence to kind of supercharge my incident detection. I'd say as a security person, I'm almost like a kid in the candy store with the stuff I can actually leverage to really supercharge the security posture of Webex calling.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think what I heard you say there is with Webex calling, and of course at Cisco we're a large organization that has not just collaboration tools but security products as well. And
absolutely, yeah, and some really top-notch ones. So Cisco's really put a lot of effort building up their security portfolio, building a portfolio that meshes together, that things work together. So as a cloud service within Cisco, I get access to that whole portfolio of things to basically use those to implement the controls we need to protect our environment.
Yeah, that's great. Brian, let me bring you into the conversation and the dialogue here. What do you think about end-to-end security from a Webex calling perspective?
The big thing it gives us, and Jim kind of made the point at the beginning about MVP and people just looking at a small slice and not looking at security. From my perspective, since even though my product is not security driven, I don't have to worry about it. I can go to Mark, or we can go to the security teams and go, look, we're getting ready to do this. And generally they go, okay, fine. Your foundation's fine. You're set for this perspective. I don't have to have that like most people do, Jim, to your point of get it out, get it fast, and we'll deal with security on the side. The lifestyle that we have here at Cisco around security gives me the ability to basically not worry about it. I can be comfortable and move forward with what I want to do, even those products that are not a security driven product, like Webex Calling, use it as a framework.
Like a feature development functionality when you're talking with your development team, that you have the confidence that security is being baked in, built into the product. Is that what you're kind of
yeah, Jesse, that's really what I'm good. It's not I don't have to remind them, hey, we need to pay attention to security, and I can stay focused on what I need to do from a product perspective around the calling lines that we put out.
Yeah, that's good. And while Cisco does have a large security portfolio, I just do want to point out too that of course Webex calling does plug in with other SSO single sign-on solutions, organizations or products as well. So I think that's an important item to understand. That of course we play with third-party standards that are out there. Jim, let me hand it over to you. Do you have any outside thoughts on end-to-end security?
Yeah, I think, I guess what I'd say is that, a few years back, there was a lot of focus around content management and lack of security. And they, basically the industry had to respond to that because there was a lot of hacks. And I think we're kind of there now relative to there's a more awareness of collaboration, communication, security than there's ever been. And, people are having to respond to the fact that, during COVID, there's been a lot of breaches and things like that. So, and some people are actually talking about saying that not everybody is secure, when actually you look at a lot of the big providers like Cisco and some of the other large, what I call tech titans, they've invested millions of dollars in securing their collaboration communications infrastructure. And, like I said, you don't have to really worry. But some people try to drag others down the mud. So what I would say is you have to have encryption. There's the voice encryption, there's actually video encryption, there's media encryption, and there's recording encryption. And there's password management. There's a lot of fundamentals. Some has to do with, how you configure the product, and some has to do like, do they have encryption? Do they have a roadmap? And so, I would say before some of the COVID, a lot of people just weren't aware that they even thought about that. And now they're thinking a lot about it. And so I think that's part of the reason that, we're doing a webinar like this, is to set the record straight. Because like I said, there's some truth in lending in the market right now where there's security consultants are saying everybody's just as bad as the weakest link in the vendor community, and that's just not true. People have spent a lot of money investing in security, and I would put Cisco right at the top. And like I said, not everybody's aware of that. And again, part of the reason we're doing this is to make people aware. So, and again, part of that also has to do with all the other things that Cisco does for network security and stuff that we will talk a little bit about. That again, people take for granted that it's secure, right? And the reality is today, a lot of the products people are buying are not secure. And so that's why I think people need to realize.
When I think about secure communications, of course, encryption comes top of mind. But there's other components that I think we need to make sure we address and talk about. And that becomes, how do you have reliability and availability from a global footprint perspective? And with that, I want to pull in Brian from the product side, just to really talk about what we're doing there to make sure our Webex Calling security cloud is available and reliable across the globe.
Yeah. So Jesse, with the might of Cisco, we have been able to gain a large global scale around how we are reliable and redundant across our infrastructure in regards to Webex Calling. We have data centers in all the major areas, from the U.S. to Asia to Latin America and Australia. That gives us this large global footprint to where we can not only service our customers in those areas, which is one of the main drivers. I now have the comfort to know that if something were to happen, I have all these areas that I could fall back on. And the scalability this gives me has been evident in the past 2 or 3 months that we've been dealing with the COVID and the lockdown, especially with us being part of the large overall Webex engine. We have seen it and we've had to react to it, and we've been able to scale and handle our customer loads as they come in, because we've been exponentially increased as workforces move remotely and move out of the offices. And we've been able to do that, and we've been able to reliably do that and to spin those up fairly easily.
Yeah, I've never seen a team move so fast on a scale side of the house. It's been amazing to see with the influx of work from home.
Right, and people tend to forget, and most people are just rely on the fact that, oh, this is easy. I was going to move them offline, and we move them into our home office, and they spin up. Whereas companies like us are like, okay, now we have to start looking at, I've shifted my workload from A to B. Now I got to increase this. Oh, we're not just using, calling and small one-to-one meetings sporadically throughout the day. We are now 8, 9, 10, 12 hours on a meeting as we go through these, because all everybody's conversation and communication interactions have all changed.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, because before I come over to Mark to talk about scaling that securely, it's just an important reminder that as we had to scale infrastructure globally, we're doing it in a secure manner. We're not. It goes back to Jim's points earlier in this discussion around making sure that security is embedded. As we scale this out, we're not just spinning up servers left and right here, but it comes with a whole life cycle for this. So Mark, do you have any additional thoughts on scaling security and reliability and availability?
I think that's a really key point, right? So, like the infrastructure and resources, security has to be scalable as well. I think, that readily leads to the fact that you need security automation, meaning automating as much of the security functions as possible. If you look at Webex Calling, we're on the DevOps journey. I use the word journey because DevOps is never ending, it's continuous improvement. But as part of that, one of the main tenets of DevOps is really automate everything, automate often, right? And if you looked at it from a security perspective, that really means like automating things like static code analysis, security testing directly into the pipelines so they're not manually done, meaning somebody commits code, it goes through security checks, right? It means ensuring that you're codifying security guardrails and policies directly into the product through infrastructure as code and configuration as code, meaning humans aren't out there trying to change things when you're scaling. It's actually rolled out as part of the infrastructure scale when it happens because it is code. It means automating security functions like auditing, meaning instead of having humans going to see, is this control working? You have automated feedback telling you this control is out there, rolled out there, and it's effective. We're constantly looking at new areas to automate.
That's great. That's some good insight. Jim, I'm going to come to you because I think from a reliability and availability perspective, it's sometimes hard to wrap our head around the scale that Cisco has, but there's always, especially with work from home, there's always that last mile. That's an industry term that technologists use quite a bit. Like you got your cable modem, but from a scale and reliability, I think it's important to talk about what Cisco does there and what do you have a viewpoint on this?
Well, yeah, because everybody talks about cloud and SaaS, but they don't talk about what we call real-time cloud. The idea of is the cloud provider you're using or the vendor that it says they're running in cloud, do they actually have a real-time configuration? Meaning, is the cloud configured for voice, video, and overall collaboration? And the reality is many clouds are not tuned for that, and that's why what Cisco and Cisco Webex have had a real-time cloud for many, many years, and it's optimized to deliver around the world. And I've been quoted in the press about that because there just aren't that many others. And without naming names, there are some cloud providers that optimize traffic for e-commerce during the day, and communications traffic is a second tier or second class citizen. So I think that really gets into vendor evaluation for people like IT. But I would say that again, it's not well understood, it's not well known that it's much harder to deliver voice and video over the web in multiple countries at the same time. In fact, some providers have had to shift cloud providers either because it was too expensive or they just couldn't scale because they refused to optimize traffic. And so when you actually look at somebody that's got native embedded capability, I think that gives people like Cisco an advantage.
Yeah, and I think just to point out one of the key differentiators that Cisco has with our global architecture is our private backbone for WebEx, right? Our data centers are writing private architectures and backbones on the back end to help with that prioritization. So
yeah, in fact, I actually got a tour of one of the Cisco data centers last year. They took a bunch of analysts through it, and it was impressive.
I hope you had your secure credentials for that because it's.
I had an escort.
Good. Okay. Good. So let's shift gears here, and we're going to talk a little more about trust behavior and transparency. And we're getting to some of my favorite topics, which is being transparent with policies. And then we're gonna, wrap up at the end of this webinar with a privacy discussion, which I think is something that's been left out in a lot of secure conversations around collaboration. So, but first, let's talk about trust, trust and transparency. Mark, let me hand it over to you.
I think you brought up trust, behavior, and transparency. I think the key out of that one is behavior. I really like the use of the word behavior because it like all behaviors start with a culture, right? So if you look at Webex Calling, our security culture is definitely a shift left approach, which, as Jim mentioned in one of his earlier slides, means security is not bolted on after the fact, post deployment. It's not an afterthought. In Cisco, it's really baked into the development lifecycle. Product security requirements are embedded during the definition phase. Things like secure coding practices, static code analysis, security testing, third-party software vulnerability management, which is a huge problem in industry with all the usage of third-party software. All of that is actually baked into the Cisco development teams, pipelines, and the interesting thing, that's not just Webex Calling, that's just part of Cisco's DNA. So Cisco has a secure development lifecycle which requires that all clouds adhere to the same requirements. And I think that's interesting because what that says is whenever you consume any Cisco cloud service, you're getting that service is being held to the same standards from a security perspective. That's not only being audited through external checkpoints like SOC 2 or ISO audits, but Cisco has independent internal oversight and governance on that through the Security and Trust Organization, which is ensuring that all the teams are living up to Cisco's CSDL commitments. I really think that's kind of, that's truly a place where Cisco's invested a lot of money into, and you can see it, and it's paid off in the quality of the products from a security perspective.
It's funny. I think one of my favorite key words that you brought up was internal governance, right?
Yes.
And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian because I'm sure he has a few key choice things to say about the governance that comes down on a product development team. That's why we have this life cycle, right?
Brian? Yeah, it goes back to Jesse, what you stated, and I'm with you from being from a product perspective, dealing with customers and being being transparent, and the governance, and it forces us to be transparent. Not that we are not wanting to be, but it gives us that thing that look, you need to let customers know what you're doing. Let them know you're making product changes. Give them a roadmap to give them visibility of what's going on. Give announcements about when changes are coming. Don't just drop it in their laps at the last minute, going, hey, by the way, here's the new stuff. Enjoy. And then also, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has problems. Everybody has issues. I think you're not moving forward and getting a better product if you don't at least trip every once in a while. And so letting customers know we have an outage, telling them what stuff is going on. Don't be afraid to have that conversation with them and go, yeah, we had an issue. Here's what it was. We rectified it. Here's the stuff we're putting in place there so we don't have it. So we make sure to try to not have it happen again.
The whole life cycle built around that, which I certainly appreciate talking with customers. They appreciate it too.
Sorry to interrupt, but to add on to that, just from a pure security transparency perspective, Cisco has always been transparent with respect to security. Just look at their PCERT notification process that's been set up, right? So Cisco's always been kind of proactive with reporting product and cloud service vulnerabilities, even when we find them ourselves internally, meaning it's not just when external people find a problem and we react saying, oh, we got to tell everybody. It's we find problems internally. We're required as a development organization to report those to PCERT, and PCERT as an independent body makes a decision on what gets reported or not. So again, that whole checks and balances where us as the cloud calling BU can't say, oh, we don't want our customers to know about that. Those decision points, that basically checks and balances from a security perspective are baked into Cisco's security DNA today.
Yeah, that's really good, Mark. And before I get some comments from Jim, I just think it's really important that the trust and transparency is really important to me. We nailed the behavior, right? The whole life cycle development into governance, but the trust to the customer is a before, during, and after process, right? As a buyer, an organization, we're very transparent with what our policies are for secure communications. We can go publicly read about those tools and needs. And of course, if something happened with an incident, we have the PSER process, and we're very transparent, how we're going to resolve it, when we're going to be able to resolve it, and so forth. And of course, Brian, you mentioned RCA's root cause analysis after the fact, if something should happen for that. So Jim, let me hand it over to you for any outside trust, behavior, and transparency thoughts.
Well, like I said, we talked earlier, and I want to just reemphasize the fact that when you have an approach which is just ship it, we think that again that product development guidelines for startups need to be enhanced to say you must be secure. And there are things to become cloud certified with things like SOC 2, and then they have to be audited to be SOC 2 compliant. But sometimes you can basically mask the product security things and still get some certifications. And so that really has to do with this whole idea of it should be secured from the beginning. And again, that puts a lot of onus on the buyers to really ask a lot of questions. And again, sometimes vendors will fool you, and it's only after it happens. Even your friends at Facebook with Workplace said it was all separate tenant when they would launch Workplace by Facebook. And it turns out it was on the same tenant infrastructure as their consumer product. And a very large company, 50,000 passwords were stolen from a very large corporate client. So that means that they did not take security seriously, and there's many other examples like that. So again, it really means that they do need to engineer it in first, not go and develop a product and it's deficient, and then they go buy a security company and say, oh, now we're secure. But that's been the modus operandi, and we think it needs to change here in Silicon Valley. Yeah,
good points. So I'm going to transition over to my favorite topic, which is privacy. This has been something with COVID that has bubbled right to the surface of how we're handling user data. Everything from PII information, how are we keeping that secure, to are we using advertising links to monetize from that. And what I've been at Cisco a long time, and I've always appreciated our clear and transparent policies. We don't sell your data. I love that Chuck Robbins, our CEO, is out there in the press talking about how we keep your data private. So with that, let me hand it back to you, Jim. And I think you're probably hearing about privacy as a really important topic these days.
Yeah, privacy is starting to bubble to the surface because it's first kind of started in Europe, but there's a whole thing relative to advertisers and wanting to profile people. And what we've seen is it's gotten way out of control, where literally, people are being invaded, on their endpoint devices, their PCs, at home, or even lighting companies are using signal trackers to track what goes on in your house. So we're really in a war that we don't know about our privacy. And Europe has stepped up with GDPR. There's a California Privacy Act, but yet the behavior of many providers is still to collect data from you and to sell it. And many of the mobile apps, if you're listening to this webinar that you have on your phone, they're actually monetizing your data by selling the behavior you're doing. What kind of exercise do you do? What kind of TV shows do you watch? What kind of things are you talking about? And so we can send you an ad about maybe you're looking for a new mattress. And so this has started to bubble up to become a major issue. And we think that the industry is going to respond with, not just, again, it's been a lot of focus on antivirus, but we think there's a new category around privacy management that's going to start to bubble up. But again, that has to do with your providers, and do they take privacy seriously too? And again, a lot of times today, it's do a certain thing and ask for forgiveness later. So It is not going to go away. This is going to get worse before it gets better. The press is starting to pick up on this. I would say today, a lot of, until, your admin gets phished. You had a client that was a CFO, and his admin was attacked at home, and that's how they got into the corporate network. And so they were able to, lift some personal information that gave them enough information to figure out, how to get in. And again, people are like, wait a minute, like we need to really get serious about this. And there aren't a lot of tools today. But again, I know Cisco's done a lot with network and security and, with some of the advanced protection stuff that you have. So it's a big industry-wide issue. It's not going to go away. And again, but this has to do with, for example, if someone is allowing a Facebook login on their website or on their service, that means your data is being stolen from your device. So lots of good examples like that. But like I said, it's an issue we all need to be aware of, and I think the industry is going to respond to this.
Yeah, that's great. That's why we go back to that beginning discussion around having the security tools all wrapped around some sort of product, right? Everything from multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, so it's all wrapped under one big architecture. Mark, as the director of calling security at Cisco, I think the privacy is probably really top of mind for you. What do you have to say about that?
Absolutely. It's actually interesting because not only do I kind of own responsibility for Webex calling security, I also own privacy responsibility too. So they're totally intertwined, right? And I guess if you look at it, at the heart of it, it's really about responsible data stewardship. It means, being mindful that the data that we are collecting, storing, creating is not Cisco's data. It's not our data to use as we like to monetize. It really belongs to the customer and our partners, and we're just the custodians, right? And if you think of it that way, I think another interesting point is Cisco, because it's a global company, and as Jim mentioned, like privacy kind of came to the forefront probably in the last 5 years with GDPR in the EU. Cisco was, literally forced to kind of develop a really robust corporate privacy program to deal with all those global, privacy requirements that are emerging and changing, like GDPR, like California's CCPA. So, so we've been at the forefront of making sure that everything in Cisco is meeting those requirements. And like security, Cisco's approach to this has really been embedding privacy directly into development lifecycle, meaning when we develop a new product, we basically collect only what we need to run the service. We basically only use it for that purpose. We delete it when we're done with it. And basically we do a privacy impact assessment on everything we collect to ensure we understand the risk if it's exposed and ensure if the proper controls are wrapped around that to protect it. And you take that, and then the other side of it, where we're transparent with our customer base with respect to privacy. Every Cisco cloud has a requirement to produce a privacy data sheet, which literally outlines what we collect, what we do with it, where is it stored, how long we keep it for, where is it geographically, meaning which locations in the world is that data today, and if we do share something, who we're sharing with and why. So it's really quite a robust privacy program that, Cisco, you can use the word force, but because of the global nature of the company, had no choice to do it. And it is really one of our strengths, I would say.
Goes back to that transparency, certainly for privacy, and then of course trust, right? You've got to have a trust factor in who you're doing business with, and how that whole security life cycle gets deployed within the product. So I just want to give, we're wrapping up here, and I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity for any last thoughts or comments that we have around secure communications. And specifically, this is, again, we're talking about Webex calling here, so I want to make sure everyone's aware of that. Mark, let me, since you're my last guy here, let's go back to you on why Cisco, right?
Yeah, I guess, we've kind of touched on a lot of the reasons I think that we're unique, right? So, we've invested heavily as a company in security and privacy by design, right? That is top down, that is mandated. We have this vast portfolio of products, networking, security products, services that we all can leverage when we build any cloud service. Not many companies have that scope of portfolio and commitment to driving security and privacy by design. So it's truly a unique position that, like Jim mentioned, you really have to be a large company to have that level of commitment and hold the business units like Webex Calling wholly accountable to living up to those high standards.
Thanks, Mark. Jim, any last thoughts or final words?
Well, look, I think, when it comes to communication, collaboration, security, you need to look at the entire landscape. It's voice, it's video, it's the messaging, and it's the content that you might be using in the course of those calls or sessions. And you got to look at the whole landscape, and you got to look at what people have today and what's their intent for tomorrow. Like I said, there's a lot of things that go into this, but at the end of the day, asking a provider to tell you what the story is, like Cisco did today, is what everyone should be asking all their providers. And then they need to make decisions based on it, because you'll know pretty quickly if they canceled the meeting that are supposed to tell you the roadmap because they don't have one, that you'll know the answer.
Yeah.
So security, everyone's responsibility.
And, Jim, you probably have based on some of the information that you shared today, I think you could have a couple movie scripts based on some of the security espionage stories that you've heard.
I think they would make some phenomenal movies. Yes.
That's good. Hey, Brian, let me bring it over to you on why Webex Calling.
Well, I think it's kind of an easy thing for me to follow those two guys, because that incorporates why Webex Calling would be a perfect fit for you and your customers. Is I have the Cisco security and privacy machine. There is, to Jim's point, we are constantly looking at the landscape. We look at all the levels of video, messaging, chat, phone, all that, constantly looking ahead at the industry and what's going on and try to stay ahead of it. So we have us doing that. You have the Cisco security machine keeping ahead of everything that's going on, and Webex Calling gives us that nice wrapper around all of that to give you a set of secure communications that you need for your customers and your business.
So it sounds pretty simple, right? We have a global reach with high availability with a private backbone. We've got a secure lifecycle process, and of course, all of the encryption policies that we've embedded into our product for secure communications. Gentlemen, I really appreciate you taking the time. Jim, thank you very much to you and Aragon Research for the outside perspective. I think it's always super important to make sure that we have that viewpoint. If your organization is interested in taking a look at a Webex Calling trial, simply reach out to your Cisco certified partner or contact your Cisco account team. And any one of our Cisco folks are always happy to review organizations' communication strategy. With that, thanks for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.